let's dive into our topic. It's a very serious in a
Mhm.
sense of understanding the dynamics of it. And again, the way I believe, at least from my end, the way I will analyze this trip and think about it is in terms of a parallel or parallels to what took place before,
Yeah.
historically speaking. You could go back to, for example, the invasion of Iraq.
Right.
And this will lead us to at least bring a brief description of or about who Victoria
Who
Nuland is,
Victoria Nuland is.
without
Yes.
spending too much time because there's too much to cover
Right.
regarding the future plans instead of the
Right.
past.
Well, she's been around for a while.
She's been in the State Department for
Mhm.
quite a while, indeed. The one thing that a lot of people did not know is that back during the invasion of Iraq,
Hmm.
because how the whole invasion of Iraq came about,
Yeah.
as you may know, it was about based on a faulty analysis. The faulty analysis was by design,
Yeah.
and all this triggered from the Iraq building weapons, mass distractions, and all that stuff.
Mhm.
So what the administration at that time ended up doing is sending none other than Wilson. Wilson used to be a former U.S. ambassador.
Mhm.
Well, usually when you are at that position, you're supposed to have the accuracy and pragmatism and so forth. Wilson took a trip to Niger at that
Mhm.
time. And why did he go to Niger? He went to Niger to find out if the so-called yellow cake, well, the yellow cake is the one that is
Right.
the
Uranium.
uranium that
Yep.
is used for the bombs and so forth. So one to Niger, and I'm just shortening all this because
Right.
without it's a
You're
long.
you're shortening a very, very
Yeah,
long.
we need about
long
10 hours
process.
for this. Anyway, came back, briefed the Congress that it was no record or indication that it was a transfer of yellow cake. So, how did the administration back then under the Bush responded? They
Mhm.
retaliated. How did they retaliate? Now, a word from our sponsor, Noble Gold. The US dollar has lost 85% of its value since the 1970s, when the dollar decoupled from gold. And the government seems bent on continuing the tradition. From now until after the next elections, the government can print as much money as it wants. The last time the government did that, inflation went up 9%. This means one thing: the security of your future and your family's future is all in your hands. Make sure you freeze the value of the wealth you are holding. Invest in gold with Noble Gold Investments. Gold is the one asset that has proven to withstand recession, inflation, and just about all economic threats. Noble Gold Investments is here to help you if you want to invest in gold. You will also get a 24 karat, 1/4 ounce gold standard coin for free. Go to geopoliticsgold.com. That's geopoliticsgold.com. The only gold company I trust. There are always risks in investments and there are no guarantees. Now back to our show. Wilson's wife, Valerie Plame, used to be a CIA agent undercover.
Mhm.
They blew up her cover, which is
Oh my
very,
god.
because the
Oh
problem with
no.
that, as you may know, how
Oh
the intelligence, as
no.
one who worked in Washington, D.C., and I had my dealings with the intelligence community,
Mhm.
without going any further than this,
Oh no.
anytime you blow up the cover of an agent, you are not only putting the agents at risk, but you put in his or her assets.
Yeah.
In her case, what makes it very concerning is that she had assets all over the world, including those in Asia.
Oh no.
So, this is why, if you notice the statements of the CIA director
Mhm.
about rebuilding the spinal network in China, which will not
Mhm.
work anyway. Chinese are very good at this
Yeah,
also.
yeah.
And there was some, I had an article, I wrote something about that, and
Mhm.
I got an email from the government asking me not to disclose.
Oh wow.
Yes, that's how sensitive it was. And I kind of
Yeah.
respect that because of the law and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And
Well, and I think it's not classified, right?
it's
They
not about
just
classified,
maybe
it's
don't
the
want
nature
people
of it.
talking about
Yeah,
it.
it's the nature of it. So But anyway, what happened, and who was involved into this? None other than Dick Cheney's chief of staff at that time, Scooter Libby. After investigations and of course taxpayers dollars wasted, because those investigations goes in a million,
Yeah.
he was found guilty. That was one who leaked her identity, and up
Yeah.
in jail. He was being pardoned, remember? Yeah. But to make story short, so who was pushing for all this?
Yeah.
It was at that time there were two individuals. One is Wolfowitz,
Yep.
who was Wolfowitz rather, who was the Undersecretary of Defense, and he was the other second person was Richard Pearl, who was the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. Those are neocons. And who the third person was behind the scenes?
Victoria
Nuland. So, but he wasn't as prominent as those two guys because they were wired inside the government.
Yeah.
So they pushed the narrative, and we all know what happened after that.
Right. Right.
So that's part of where Victoria Nuland re-emergence or emergence into the political scene as far as destabilizing other places.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 2014, we all know what happened in Ukraine. And I disclosed all this in my Russia book. It's because who fomented the tensions and the provided funding? That's Victoria Nuland through State Department. $5 billion was funded. The reason I'm mentioning all this is to tie it to South Africa.
Yeah.
And here is what we want you guys to get into this. Just because she's going to South Africa, it doesn't mean things are going to happen overnight. Look when that stuff in Ukraine started.
Yeah.
2014.
2014.
When was the military operations of Russia started?
Yeah.
2022.
Right.
Almost
only
a decade.
a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah, almost a decade.
Right.
This is the point of why we decided to talk about this, because we wanted to be ahead of the curve.
Right.
We wanted to provide you insights into what could be lying ahead moving forward. Because what's lying ahead, as far as BRICS, this is with the assumption that India will get its act together.
Sure.
India is another topic that we need to go into one day, because that's how it starts. So the logical question you guys need to ask, and you're smart enough to know, what is the objective of her trip to South Africa at this time, right before the summit of the BRICS, which is going to be between August 22nd and August 24th.
Well, it's interesting because you're talking about so first of all, a couple of things that you mentioned, I think, are really critical to pay attention to. The first one is Ukraine. So I have a video, actually, Tucker Carlson, I don't agree with everything he has to say, but some things he says are pretty spot on. But Tucker Carlson actually did a large piece of his show on Victoria Nuland. And I actually have a very interesting short, a YouTube short from the Carnegie Endowment with Victoria Nuland talking about end goals for Ukraine. So I'll share that in a second.
Sure.
But there's a couple things to really be thinking about. And one of the things that you said that is critically important is that these things, they're planned over decades.
That's true.
They're not planned for immediate. And so that's why I think a lot of people, when they argue, the BRICS currency, or there's no way that China's economy, all of that stuff, right? Yes, it's not happening right now.
No.
But most of us will still be around in a decade, but the world will look very different than it does right now. The world looks very different now than it did a decade ago. So to be paying attention to, this didn't start now, and it probably didn't start in 2014. It probably started before that at some time we didn't know.
Actually, it started all the way back to 2008.
Okay, that's interesting. Tell us more about this.
Oh, that's a lot of stuff sensitive into that aspect of it. So,
well, what is not sensitive that you?
Well, it's the idea is that at the beginning of the Obama administration, when he took over, because who was the vice president at that time?
Our current president.
Yeah, and
Joe Biden.
And the dealings of the current vice president's son, or president rather, son, with Burisma in because Vice President Biden at that time pressured Lukashenko at the time of who was elected by the people in Ukraine, pressured him to fire the attorney general in Ukraine. Because why? because the Attorney General in Ukraine was conducting an investigation
Mm,
in return for a $5 million deal.
wow.
So that's why it runs very deep.
Yeah.
So, but the whole beginning of all that starts at that time, because when they were back in 2008, we start to for us in Washington at that time thinking in terms of we saw the signs that most Ukrainians wants to move east with
Mhm.
Russia, not Europe. We wanted to reverse that trend
Yeah.
by any means.
Well, we saw the means.
Well, it started,
We're
yeah,
watching it happen right
but it
now.
started in 2008.
Yeah.
Look how long it took from 2008 to 2014.
Right.
Then from 2014 all the way to now.
Right.
That's why we're saying the pattern. So if just because she's going to Nuland and Victoria Nuland going to South Africa doesn't mean that's no. It's gonna be the question of how South Africa is gonna handle.
That's a great question.
It's because you can't kick her out. One,
right?
It's because first of all, American citizens do not need a visa to go into South Africa. That's one. Second, she's not a persona non grata.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no reason.
So she's just going because any justification for her will be, oh, I'm just coming to visit the U.S. Embassy.
Right.
There's nothing you can say about that one. So
well, and what it does seem like about her is, there are some people you look at and politically they're not very knowledgeable, or they're politicians, but they don't really know what's going on. I don't believe that personally about her. From what I've read and what I understand about her, she seems to have a pretty solid grasp on things.
Well, she's been around. She's not somebody who just came from the other side overnight. No. She's been around in State Department.
Exactly.
And you acquire the knowledge of how countries operate. And when you practice, when you start practicing and you see what works and what doesn't work, because now she saw what works in Ukraine. Is she about to replicate that in South Africa?
Right.
She saw what worked in Ukraine. We tried it in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So the patterns.
Right.
So the only thing is, the one to think about it geopolitically is that in the case of South Africa, it's because the timing. In geopolitics, timing makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Things don't happen just randomly. There is no such thing as random in geopolitics. So what am I referring to here? I'm referring to the possibility of how BRICS, if it plays its card, if it plays its strategic cards the right way, it could reshape the trajectory of the global order.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. There are those who say, oh no, BRICS can't do that. Yeah, they can do it now.
Yeah.
But you have to think in terms of the next decade.
Yeah.
And when you have about 40 countries lined up, once, of course, BRICS sort out its issues with India, because India now is like the odd cousin, if you will, odd member. India will have to make a decision.
Well, and there are talks about replacing India. I mean, there are whispers at this point, but replacing India with Indonesia, for example, because Indonesia does have actually a very large economy. So one of the most interesting questions I think here is, why is South Africa actually in BRICS? Because you look at the other BRICS countries, and the BRICS countries are Brazil, China, Russia, India, South Africa, right?
Yeah.
What is South Africa actually contributing to the BRICS countries? Because you have China with a very, very large, second largest economy and a large population. You have India with a large population that, you're absolutely right, kind of needs to get its
act together.
It needs to get its act together.
We say it the way it is.
Well, I wanted to use a different word, but YouTube.
I know what you mean.
You have Russia, which is very resource rich, and right now it has a lot of oil, has a lot of minerals. And then so you have South Africa. What is the strategic importance of South Africa in particular?
Well, there are two things.
Yes, let's dive into that.
You just take DRC and South Africa and think about them in terms of natural resources.
Exactly.
Yeah. Then you take DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Then you take also, for example, Niger. Just consider the massive wealth in gold. Then for South Africa in itself, you think about geography. That's why there's
Yeah.
something called political geography. Where South Africa is located, because of access to waters.
Yeah.
Access to waters from which end? Yeah, and
Yeah.
both sides.
Yeah.
You
And
look in the
both sides.
Atlantic and you look in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
So this is why you think in terms of why South Africa will play a role. Yes, of course, South Africa can be compared to China's
Of course.
economy. It's common sense. But South Africa is a team player.
Yes.
They are willing
They
to
are.
play with whatever, because if he will move the team, it's like what we do in sport, or even for us in the military with this, the team. If there is somebody who's hindering the progress of a team, what do?
Yeah. Or you get rid of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
replace the guy. That's it, or the
Right.
gal for that
Right.
matter. So, because you could have female also in special ops and all that.
Absolutely.
So the idea of that's one of the key. But for Victoria Nuland's trip at that time, timing matters,
Mhm.
context matters.
Absolutely.
Besides just trying to crash the party, is because any news that's going to come out of BRICS, especially with the announcements of the currency,
Yeah.
her presence there, and even if some events or something happens, will overshadow.
Right.
That's one of the objectives for her.
Completely
Yeah,
overshadow the currency.
yeah. But for her,
Yeah.
and not just her, is the administration, ours.
Right.
The objective is long term, not a short term.
I very much agree with that. And I think there's two interesting things.
Yeah.
So the ICC, for example. So
Yeah.
so that's where a lot of the drama with Putin going to South Africa for the BRICS summit
That's
has
true.
come from, right?
That's
So
true.
they said, hey, if you go to South Africa,
You'll
gonna
get
arrest you. You'll get arrested. And South Africa at first was basically said, we'll provide security for you.
Yeah.
We don't want that to happen. We'll provide security for you. So South Africa, you're right, really seems to be a team player in
Yeah.
BRICS. Granted, there's a lot in it for them, I think, to be part of BRICS.
For sure.
So I understand why that's happening. And they don't have a better deal, right? The US isn't coming to South Africa and being like, well, why don't you be our partners, right? That's not happening. And so it's very strategic for them. So I'm not saying they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart, right? But that is something that this is my personal take on it, is that was meant to overshadow the currency also. So had Putin actually come to the summit, I think that situation would have overshadowed the BRICS currency.
Yeah.
The second thing that I think is happening that maybe was not predictable is that people really are talking about the BRICS currency. This isn't something that
in the void.
In the void,
Yeah.
right? And it wasn't.
There's a
It wasn't
Yeah.
exactly. There's a
conversation
conversation about
That's
it.
true.
And there's, I think, more of a conversation than people in the United States or the US government had anticipated. I mean, granted, I don't know what they did or didn't anticipate, but there is a large conversation about it, and there should be. And so, you're having a lot of people like us, you're having a lot of very intelligent people talking about de-dollarization.
Yeah.
Because if you've noticed, a lot of the big things that have happened in terms of this BRICS currency and in terms of de-dollarization in our news cycle have been overshadowed by something else. They've been overshadowed by the submarine, which, God rest their souls. But, that kind of thing, that's not really global news, quite frankly. It is deeply unfortunate, but it is not global news. So you have things like that have come out at very strategic times to overshadow things that are happening in the world. And I think that Victoria Nuland, you're right, is going, and Africa right now is just starting to be talked about as the next China, as the new China, in the sense that they have, number one, a growing youth population. Because
for the whole continent,
for the
not
whole
just
continent, right, not South Africa.
For the whole continent.
However, there is also a losing of the west of Africa and a gaining access, right? So
true.
We had colonialism in Africa, right?
Yeah.
Now that's not the case anymore. Who does have impact in Africa? Who does own mineral mines? Who does own those resources? Right now, it's China and Russia a lot.
That is true. Well, this one, you have to put it within the context of what's going to be taking place next, I think 2 days, 3 days from now. No, actually on Thursday. Check out, guys, this picture. This one here. This here has to do with the upcoming summit between Russia and Africa. This is the second summit in St. Petersburg. The first one took place in 2019
Yeah.
in Sochi.
Yeah.
This one here in St. Petersburg. And it comes at a time, at a crucial time. Of course, it's going to be before the BRICS,
Right.
because most countries, let me move this picture out. Most countries are in Africa are siding with Russia.
Yeah.
That's one. But beside that, Russia is also willing to work with Africa. I'll give you the example of the grain deal that was just
hugely. Yep.
so what the West refrained from disclosing is that we didn't honor our our side of the agreement by by allowing Russians grain and fertilizer
Yep.
to be also shipped. Why? It's because the deal that was made in July 2022 last year, it was headed by Turkey and the United Nations, and of course, Russia and Ukraine. The agreement was, of course, the West, collective West, agreed to it, was that both Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine will ship its own grain,
Yep.
Russia will ship its own grain and fertilizer. All of them, there's no other way for them to get out except through the Black Sea.
Yeah.
Black Sea is under the control of Russia. Russia agreed to create a corridor where that grain will be moved. And that was working fine from July of last year till recently.
Yep.
We switched sides.
Yep.
We said, oh no, we're only going to allow Ukraine, but not UK, but not Russia.
Yeah.
Well, Russia had to make a decision,
Of
so they
course.
stopped. Why am I bringing this up? Because the Russian president offered the deal to African countries, grain even for free.
Yeah.
For free. That shows you why. I'm sure they're going to address it in the summit that's going to take place on Thursday. That shows you the relationship between Russia and Africa. And this is something we do not want to see moving forward.
Yeah.
Same way we did for Europe.
Yeah.
When Europe was getting gas from Russia, because remember, there are two pipelines, right?
Yep.
Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2.
Yeah.
Nord Stream 1 is controlled by Russia. Nord Stream 2 is controlled by Germany.
Yeah.
Okay. We couldn't shut down the first one, but we could influence the second one.
Yeah.
So when Germany starts receiving gas from Russia through a pipeline, first Nord Stream 1, how did the economy of Germany do? Shot up to the top.
Absolutely.
We got concerned about that.
Yep.
So we started to think. As a matter of fact, we have on a record in our library of videos, there is a video there. And I remember I mentioned, I did a video with Ross, I remember way back, that when the US threatened to sanction Germany, and we said, what the heck?
Right.
Sanctioning an ally.
An ally.
We threatened them because we were concerned that Germany was getting closer to Russia and economically moving up.
Yeah.
So fast forward to what just took place with Nord Stream 2. Here is a shocker for you. Most people do not know that when the planning was in motion regarding the blow up of the Nord Stream 2, the White House was presented with two options. And the two options were, do you want the act to be reversible or irreversible? You know what it means?
Yeah.
Which means is if we conduct an op, if you want it reversible, that means we're going to just create short-term damage and it can be reversed and things will go normal. If you want us to conduct an op where the damage will be irreversible, we can do that.
Yeah.
And guess what was the decision on?
Irreversible.
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 Because we never, ever wanted Germany to get closer to Russia. And when you think about Germany's economy, you think about Europe.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's what's at the heart of it. So this is why I said at the beginning of the show, guys, the parallels.
Right.
That's what I'm referring to here.
Right.
So for Victoria Nuland to be in South Africa, it's because you're seeing the parallels.
Well, and where is this conference, right? It's in St. Petersburg.
That's correct.
And so basically at the same time that more or less, right? Because we don't think we don't know exactly when she's going, but more or less, look at that timing. Look at the timing of Victoria Nuland going to South Africa.
Yeah.
At the same time that this summit is being held in
Yeah.
Africa, more or less.
But it was a reason why the date is not disclosed.
Right.
To leave everybody
Wondering,
guessing.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's the whole. But the objective of it is also to reduce the impact of that strength of that cooperation.
Right.
BRICS can play a major role in
Right.
influencing the global trajectory, especially with what's going on with us regarding our ill-conceived foreign policy. We don't
Right.
have foreign policy, like I always say.
Right.
But for this, to me, as an analyst, I am seeing the signs of another path, almost similar to Ukraine. It's not going to be reflected in the same setting,
Right.
because South Africa is not Ukraine,
Right.
you know. And don't get me wrong, South Africa has its own corruption issues and host.
hugely.
Yeah, don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
And I don't speak softly on countries like
Right,
that. I
right.
don't care who they are.
Right.
You know, they need to act there or get their act together regarding the corruption. As a matter of fact, corruption is one of the things hindering not just South Africa,
Right.
but the
all
whole
of
continent.
Africa, yeah.
For the wealth they have. You know how much wealth they have?
Right.
Manpower, natural resources, geography.
Right.
Can you imagine if they get their act together and work together?
Yeah.
And this is why you're seeing now the emergence of some African leaders who are pushing hard against the West. That's why they end up kicking France out of Mali.
Yeah.
That was for a reason.
Well, and kicking France out of Mali, for example, is probably very good for that area, right? It's probably actually a very good thing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting watching the political changes happen in Africa as we are seeing Chinese investment, as we are seeing Russian influence and investment. So I think it's actually become very, very clear that there really is a shift of power that's happening in Africa. And it isn't Africa for the sake of Africa.
Yeah.
It's other countries, specifically Russia and China,
Yeah.
going into Africa to exert that influence. And like I said, Africa is one of the only places in the world, the entire continent. So it's specific places in Africa, but it's one of the only places in the world where we are actually seeing an increase in population instead of the massive decrease that we're having even in China, in the United States, all over Europe. We have a massive decrease in population. People don't want to have kids.
That's true.
And it's interesting to think, actually, why do people not want to have kids? And, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the biggest ones is the massive instability, massive instability in the West. Right now, if you go to any Western country, we have this constant war. We have this narrative. We have, climate change. We have all of this stuff going on. It's a challenging time, and it's very expensive to have kids.
That's true.
Very, very expensive.
I want to touch on one point you mentioned about exerting influence.
Yeah.
I know what you meant by that. Just for our viewers, so they won't misinterpret that.
Yes, people are good at misinterpreting. I've noticed.
That's
in
why
the
I wanted
comments.
to clarify this one.
Thank you.
So, because usually in foreign affairs, anytime you mention the word exert, it always takes that negative connotations.
Sure.
That's not in this context, because I knew what you meant, and for right reason. It's because this exertion of influence, it will be on a mutual basis,
sure,
which means both are benefiting.
Yeah.
Where the bad part about exerting influence takes that negative,
right,
when one party is exerting influence, like what we have with Europe, like what we have with Japan, Philippines, and now Australia. I don't know if you heard what happened in Australia 2 days ago.
What happened?
We had our Navy personnel marching on the street for a parade of sorts.
Oh.
Is bad. Is bad optics of it.
That's very bad.
Yeah, this is why New Zealand is taking the opposite direction.
Yeah.
New Zealand now is being labeled as the bad, not the odd. Why? Because they saw what took place in Australia.
Yeah.
They said, no. We're going to maintain our relationship with China.
Yeah.
We're going to maintain our trade and so forth.
Well, so here's the thing about that, because I absolutely agree with you. I do not see the same thing happening with China and Russia
Yeah.
exerting influence
Yeah.
in the same ways that Europe did, for example, because colonialization was terrible.
Oh yeah.
Like that is a horrible mark that the European countries more or less left on a lot of parts of the world. Even for the United States, I remember when I was a kid growing up, Columbus discovered America.
What?
That's insanity to think about.
Mm.
To think about children being taught that Columbus discovered a
Discovered.
continent that had a lot of people on it already, and that already had civilizations, and that other people had already found, seems kind of
Yeah,
crazy,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then everything that happened, he was touted as a hero. We still have Columbus Day, right? We
It's
still
ridiculous.
we have, but that's the narrative, right? The narrative is, went and did this great thing, when I think the reality now is people realize that didn't happen. So colonialization of many parts of the world
Yeah.
was actually horrible and horrifying. What I'm saying is I am seeing it happen differently. I am seeing it happen in the boosting of local economies, in the
Yeah.
buying up of mines and resources.
Mhm.
However, I do want to make this point, because I've said this before, but I think it's to me, it's one of those gnawing things in my mind. When you own everything,
Okay.
right? So let's say China and Russia own massive amounts of natural resources all over. Yes, they are absolutely building up those communities, and those communities needed to be built up. So I respect that very much. However, when you own things, you have a level of influence that
That is
other
true.
people don't.
That is true.
And when you look at China, for example, and China has a lot of its own problems. If you
Yeah.
guys are interested, I would really like to do a deep dive into some of the economic problems that China is facing,
Mhm.
because although they are a huge economy, they are facing some very massive problems in their own right.
Yeah.
One of them being population. The aging population and the youth unemployment are huge problems for China. But there is an influence that comes with money. There is an influence that comes with owning natural resources.
Uh-huh.
And I don't want to put that aside. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because it does matter. So I want to be clear about that. I do see them building up those communities. However, there is an influence that comes with owning things and money.
Yeah, but at the same time, there is the arrangements from the beginning, so those countries can say no if they don't want to. I mean, as I
Absolutely,
said,
absolutely.
no country is going to get involved in infrastructures for free. There is no such thing,
And they shouldn't. They
yeah,
shouldn't.
I think for us the big concern is that that's going to tip the balance of power. This
Yeah.
is where the key issue is.
Exactly.
That's what's at the heart of it. It's
And that's why
because
Victoria Nuland is going.
yeah, and this is why we are not willing to accept the reality that the world has moved from a unipolar, or
Right.
shifted and not moved. I'll use the term the right way. It shifted from a unipolar to a multipolar.
Right.
We are not willing to accept that. It's no different. I'm sorry, not longer. No different than what happened in Washington after the end of the Cold War.
Yeah.
And still, the mindset thinking that we won the Cold War. We never did.
Right.
Those who were claiming this either had no understanding of Russian history, or were oblivious to living in their parallel world.
Right.
That no. There was never an end to the Cold War.
Right.
It's in a different setting for that. So with what's going on in Africa, especially with the presence of Russia and China, this specifically aimed at the shifting of the balance of power.
Absolutely.
Because even though we never had a policy towards Africa, we always left that to our European counterparts.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't going to use the term counterpart.
Got it. Are European allies?
I wasn't even going to use the word ally. I was going to use the term servants.
Well,
so
that might be more accurate.
It's the truth.
Yeah.
It's the truth.
Sure.
You think European can do anything without the approval of the US?
No.
You
not at this point.
Look at the UK. Look at this is why UK had a hard time, and I intend to address this in the course.
Yeah.
I had a hard time at the beginning accepting how colonial entity will become better than us.
Yeah.
Britain never was happy about when we got the independence,
Of
and
course.
we overtook Britain.
Right.
So that's why now it becomes clear they can do nothing without the approval of the US.
Yeah.
It's no different than France, Germany, Netherlands. Netherlands is bad at that, which, by the way, you don't hear much about, but it's in same fold.
Yeah.
But if you look at the history of Africa, who was there, you look at the main players. If we are to go way back, Portugal,
Yep.
we look at France, Germany, Belgium, and Dutch.
Yeah.
Those were the main. Russia and China in modern day, in contemporary time, came to represent the shift of that balance.
Absolutely.
That's why France didn't like when he was kicked out of France.
Yeah.
But also because the massive resources, like I said last time, how come all of a sudden France announcing that it has massive amount of gold?
Right.
Where that gold came from? France doesn't have gold.
Right.
Where did it come from? So
well, it came from Africa.
Niger.
Yeah.
So and this is where at the heart of really what Victoria Nuland is going to Africa for long term.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think it is really the power play by the United States to really try and get some influence really back, some ownership back of Africa.
Yeah. Well, I do have a big concern within BRICS, and that concern has to do with India. I don't shy away from saying.
I agree.
I know I noticed some comments from some. I'm like, I don't like India. It's a weak argument. You guys, please, whoever put that stuff, stop talking nonsense. It is nonsense. Just take a step back and really think about it. All of a sudden, you got an India, one in BRICS, that is already claiming, oh, we are not going to support the currency. Well, that's fine.
Right.
You don't want to support the currency. It's because they want their rupees. And we will talk about that when we talk about the. I don't want to get ahead of myself if we're going to do the second topic about the.
But you're absolutely
BRICS
right.
currency.
They do want to prop up their rupees, which I understand. Okay, like I understand that phenomena of wanting to prop up your own currency,
wanting
right?
versus the reality are two different things.
Right. They just don't. And I actually really love India. I loved being in India.
Yeah. It's
Indian
nice
people,
place. It's old
absolutely.
civilization. Nobody
gosh.
can decline dismiss that.
Ancient Indian culture is priceless.
He offered a lot to humanity.
Yeah.
It's the problem now is where it's headed
Right.
with this ill-conceived policies. Those are wrong policies that Modi, Prime Minister Modi, is embarking on.
Yeah.
Those policies are not and will not be serving Indian people.
Right.
It will be serving the upper class.
Right.
I mean, I look at just what happened with what's that company, Foxconn.
Oh,
They left.
yeah.
You look at the company from China that offered $1 billion manufacture for the EV batteries. China turned it down, claiming the same playbook.
Yeah.
Oh, security concerns.
Yeah.
Do they realize the opportunities that's going to provide? Come on.
Well, I mean, even last time I was in India, the joke was there's corruption, right? Like they told me that. This wasn't something that I got out of nowhere. They were the ones joking about corruption in India, and that was, in their opinion, the biggest hindrance to India really becoming a global power. Is that there was just too much corruption. There were too many people who were looking out for their own best interest and not for the best interest of the country as a whole. And I personally hope that changes. I hope that changes.
I don't see that. If Modi is still in power, I don't see that. The reason I'm saying this, I am going back to the time when Gandhi was the PM. I'm going back to the time when Atal Vajpayee was the PM. I'm going back to the time when Manmohan Singh was. India wasn't dealing with this issue. India was moving forward. India has certain things working for it. Two things. You got the manpower.
Population, absolutely.
And they got the brain power.
Very, very
smart. But they're not
utilizing
utilizing this the right way.
Right.
How can you expect a country to play a global role when your infrastructure is not where it needs to be?
Right.
This is not about putting India down, like some have argued. It's nonsense. It's about presenting the facts as they are. How can you expect to play a role on a global stage when your poverty level still way up.
Absolutely.
You have
Absolutely.
to fix these domestic
Yeah.
issues. Then you can consider. So the way I see the problem in BRICS, with India still being there, is now the BRICS will be hindered at every turn because
Mhm.
India will be playing those policies of, oh
Yeah.
no, we don't disagree with this because it doesn't benefit or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, I got a word for India. You know, if you don't like it, just pack your bags and get out.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Well, and that might very well happen. We
Yeah,
don't know.
they did that.
That
They
might
did.
very well happen.
India did
Yeah.
this with the RCEP, with the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership.
Yeah.
Just for the record, RCEP did not kick India. It was India's choice to leave
Mhm.
because it started to realize, hey, those policies are not in my interest.
Yeah.
So India will do itself a favor by doing both,
Yeah.
leaving the BRICS and leaving the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yeah.
So otherwise, the progress of those organizations is not going to move forward.
Yeah.
Because here is to tie it to what we're talking about. The fear in the West is that if BRICS keeps going, moving forward with the potential list of countries, mark my word on this, it will overtake the EU's economy
Absolutely.
in no time. You already have about 41% of a consumer global market isn't just within BRICS
Right.
countries.
Is
And India plays a role into that.
right.
But they're going to have to sort of get on with the program or get out.
Mhm.
Simple as that.
Well, and I absolutely agree with that. And that's maybe a great segue into our second topic,
Yeah.